So let's talk to Georgia voters and find out what they want to hear tonight. Donna Sharpe is a Republican. McCray is a Democrat. McCray, excuse me, and Bernadette Wright is an independent. Great to have all of you here. Bernadette, let me start with you. How important is this debate to you tonight?
This debate is extremely important. When you look at how the candidates are talking about one another, no one is talking about the issues. And I feel like this debate is an opportunity to see whether or not Herschel Walker can really go to Washington and do what he says he can do. At this point, from everything I'm hearing, it just looks like he is somewhat of a puppet. And so there's a puppet master behind it, but I want to see what he does on his own without someone giving him a cue card or without someone telling him exactly what to say. So I'm looking forward to tonight's debate so I can really see who both of the candidates are.
So he has said, I'm this country boy, I'm not that smart, and he's a preacher, he's a smart man, wears these nice suits, so he's going to show up and embarrass me. He's kind of lowering expectations here, Donna, for his own performance. What are you going to be watching for tonight? How important is this to your vote?
Well, it's important. I think that I'm going to be looking at how he can answer the questions because I, feel the same way. But I think he can be up to the task. I think he can. I think it's good for him to be able to express himself because there's been so much out there slandering him.
Well, he has, he had this whole situation with the girlfriend who said that he paid for the abortion. Here's a little exchange with one of our reporters at Fox Digital. Watch this. We'll get your reaction.
Are there other women out there? Are there going to be other stories coming out there that you're going to have to deal with between now and Election Day?
Well, I think they really want to win this seat that bad. So they're coming up with anything they can come up with. But they don't realize that they're walking a grizzly bear. And I wanted everything I set my mind to. And so now they got a fight on their hand. Before I was just going to beat them by a little bit, but now I'm going to beat them by a lot.
Does this controversy over the last week, though, does it make you look like a hypocrite?
No, because I said it's a lie.
So, Marcus, you're a Democrat. What do you think about Herschel Walker? And are you originally from Georgia? Did you grow up there? What's your impression of him?
No, I grew up in Alabama. I grew up knowing who Herschel Walker was and moved to Georgia. Been here long enough to understand the import that he is to the state. But I don't think that this is the task that he is up to. I think that we should actually be fielding candidates that are actually qualified for the job. And I don't know what Herschel Walker's done to prove to us that he has command of the issues or any real reason to be in the United States Senate.
So Bernadette, when you look at this, abortion is an issue that a lot of Democrat voter dollars have gone towards, especially in the past few weeks. About $73 million, almost a quarter of their ads, third of their ads are focused on this. How important is that issue to you when you vote?
To be honest with you, the Supreme Court has spoken. So the law of the land is the law of the land. I feel like that is an issue, but it's not the primary issue. People are hurting economically. People are hurting trying to figure out how to put food on their tables. Jobs are an issue. There are more important things for people to talk about. Not to say that it's not important, but it's not a primary focus.
So you're an independent voter. Which way are you leaning now?
In the governor's race?
In the Senate race first.
In the Senate race, I'm actually leaning towards Ralph Warnock.
Yeah, because
Herschel Walker has not demonstrated the ability to be able to lead from what I've been hearing so far. And anyone who stands up and says, like you commented a few moments ago, that they're not very smart and that they're expecting the other candidate to embarrass them, I want someone smart to go there. I want someone who's able to think creatively and out of the box, because if he can't think for himself, then who's really going to Washington?
And what about in the governor's race?
In the governor's race, I am leaning towards Kemp and looking forward to the debate that's going to happen next week.
So you are truly an independent. Yes. You're looking at one Republican and one Democrat in the Georgia race. What are your friends, your women friends, saying about how important the abortion decision was to them in Georgia?
Well, I think it's not just a Democrat issue because I teach at a Catholic school. And I think a lot of Republicans are geared up to go fight for the unborn child. And so I have a lot of friends that are that way. But then I have other friends that are worried about the women's rights.
And is it, for most people you talk to, and Marcus, let me ask you this one, is that a driving issue for them, or are they more concerned about crime, more concerned about inflation? What are people talking about when you talk about this vote? What matters to them?
So I think people really care more about the kitchen table issue. So they're caring more about the economy. There's been discussions in my circles about abortion, and what has surprised me is that there's been conservative women who've been concerned about the fact that we moved so quickly from what we thought was settled law based on what we heard from all of the Supreme Court candidates that we saw come forward over the last few years. But I don't think it is the thing that is going to motivate most people, and it's not going to affect most people's lives. I think we need to be realistic about that. Like, not everybody's having an abortion, but everybody has a bill to pay at the end of the month.
Well, I don't think you could really put it much better than that. What do you think about the job, Marcus, that the president has done so far, President Biden?
I think he's actually played pretty well with a losing hand. He's actually been able to get a lot of his policy initiatives out. I don't know that we're going to know what those policies look like for a while, right? So we just passed the Inflation Reduction Act. We're still fighting with whatever it is that the Fed is going to do. Whatever that looks like is probably going to extend beyond his term. We won't know the effects of what Donald Trump looks like for another 30 years, just like we don't know what all of the decisions that happened for Ronald Reagan, like we're just starting to get rid of the folks that were on the court.
All right.
It takes a while, and people have to realize that.
Marcus is giving the president a pass on inflation and on rising gas prices. Do you agree, Bernadette?
No.
Why?
I don't. I feel like he could have did a better job with inflation, with all of the spending that's coming out of Washington. We're printing money, and the value of the dollar is increasingly going down. I believe that a lot of the decisions that have been made in Washington have led us to the situation that we're in now. I believe it's a joke to say that we're not really in a recession when every time we go to the gas pump, every time we go to the grocery store, we know we're in a recession. Every household in America knows it. Why Washington doesn't know it, I'm confused about.
Quick final thought?
I mean, I agree. Well, actually, I disagree that he's doing a good job, and I don't think he was dealt a bad hand. I think he's made what he inherited worse, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Donna and Marcus and Bernadette. I really appreciate you coming up and stopping on your way back from Boston, Marcus. Good to see you all. I hope we'll talk again. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens tonight. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.